Good evening, everybody. This is W2NDG, Whiskey 2, November, Delta Golf, Neil from Highland, starting the OMARC, Sunday Night Science and Technology Night. Please stand by. Okay, once again, this is W2NDG, the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Night. If you're listening on the radio, you're listening to 146.805 megahertz. And if you'd like to get into the repeater, you're going to need a negative 600 kilohertz shift and a PL tone of 103.5 hertz. You can also listen to us or watch us on YouTube. And that you can find by either going to Google or YouTube and searching for W2NDG Science and Technology. The recording will also be available at my YouTube channel that you can stream it afterwards. And if you are watching online, feel free to chime in the chat. You can participate just like our repeater members here are. And as always, you don't have to be a member of the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club to participate, but we ask that you check us out, and if you like what you hear, why not become a member? We'll cover all that later, but it's at omarcclub.org, omarcclub.org. All right, I am usually joined by my partner in crime here and sidekick, Jim, K2BHM. Jim, are you here tonight?
Quick check of the mirror. Yep, I'm here. K2BHM.
All right, Jim. And what I decided to do tonight, I know we were throwing a couple of topics around, and something came up on the 630 net and earlier today that made me realize this definitely something that we could do a whole topic on, and that is computer printing. A little bit of its history, a little bit of its frustration, and a little bit of its technology, maybe. There's certainly a lot to talk about there. And you can branch off into other subjects with that. It's definitely something we can expand on quite a bit. But for those of you who subscribe to the OMARC Groups I.O. list, I did send out an interesting article, which also kind of reinforced that this is what I wanted to talk about tonight. And it's about the history of radio facsimile, which did include printing. And I never realized what the dawn of that technology was actually for. Even though it does have roots in utility use, weather, and even the press used to send pictures all over the globe using radio facsimile. There was a commercial home version of it that was directed at people who might not go out and buy a newspaper. Really interesting marketing idea that I guess took off lightly and didn't stick. But anyway, I thought we'd talk about printing and where it's gone and where it started. So let me throw it over to Jim for comment on that.
Yeah, it goes way back. Lots of problems and issues back in the early days with drivers and compatibility and stuff like that. And interesting you should mention facsimile, the latest issue of Nuts and Bolts. I didn't get a chance to read it yet, but it goes into the origin of facsimile. I think if I remember right, they quoted a date, something like 1935, where they were actually sending pictures for the air.
And that is exactly the article I was referring to. It showed up in my email today, and I was able to link to it. There's a public version of the article. And you'd be surprised that, the particular version of it they talk about in the article was for the general consumer to get their news. And it was done over regular AM broadcast radio stations overnight after midnight. Really cool stuff. So, yes, that's exactly the article I was referring to.
Yeah, interesting. I thought it was coincidental. Yeah, it goes way back, 35. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes, and before the advent of satellite technology and the internet and everything else we use now to exchange information, the radio facsimile technology had gotten to the point where they could send some pretty high quality color photos over HF radio. Really neat.
Yeah, I remember working at a place doing some repair work on stuff, Albany film, back in the 70s. And one of the guys there in the store facility had an old facsimile set up there that they didn't use anymore, but it was still operational. And he wanted to give it to me, but it was so big and bulky, and it's like, what do I do with it? Because nobody else has anything compatible with it. So I didn't partake of it, but that probably would have been a good slice of history now.
Yeah, I never realized, even I guess it was in the 80s when I first had a demonstration of the practical use that press had for it. And at that time, the manager and eventual owner of Guilford Shortwave in New Jersey was rather fond of one of the UPI feeds he found on HF, because a particular UPI photographer in Brazil kept sending color photos of bikini-clad women on the Brazil beach. And Paul would try to catch as many of those photos as he could and use those as his examples of what you could get using some of the devices that he sold.
I imagine that would have boosted sales pretty good.
A lot of us miss Guilford, one of the many radio companies that's long gone, but they were a lot of fun. All right, let's see who else is here tonight to discuss printing and printing technology. And you can check into the net by giving us your call sign, your first name, and your location. Please come now.
All right, I'll break the ice. N3EYCL. Paul. Brady Water Wilmington.
All right, Paul. I got you. Anybody else tonight?
Control. Here is KB2, GGS, Matt in Kerhonkson.
All right, Jerry almost won that one, but I know you're here, Jerry. Whoever else was competing with Jerry, I have no idea.
It was me, Neil, KB2, TVS, Lou, West Milford.
I should have realized, Lou. We have the core group here. All right. Anybody else? All right, we can start with that. And yeah, we want to talk about printing. I mean, I'll spend a few minutes just, talking about the different kinds that we're talking about. Obviously, the origins of computer printing, which is what we're talking about, not printing in general, because we'd have to go back to Ben Franklin and before. But computer printing, early computer printing was impact. Basically, the typewriter already existed, and the typewriter had been somewhat started to head in the electronic direction to where it wasn't hard to translate computer ones and zeros into some sort of code that something like an IBM Selectric typewriter could print. So impact printing, like a ball head type of impact like the Selectric used, or a daisy wheel style, which was just a big wheel of raised letters and numbers. Different styles of actual impact printing. So you were striking a ribbon against a piece of blank paper. There was also carbon transfer printing, which could have done with basically, impact was kind of carbon transfer printing, but they would use heat to something like a printing ribbon made of carbon paper material, and they would actually have like a heated stylus that would draw. There was pen printing, which used a similar idea to what we use today for something like CNC or 3D printing, where you had an X and a Y axis and an actual pen that would write or draw on a piece of paper and lift where you needed the break. Commonly used for types of mechanical drawing, making blueprints and such. But you could also just, print a document with it. It wasn't particularly efficient or fast, but it worked. But those are the early types of computer printing. I'll throw it over to Jim for anything else.
Yeah, even predating that, back in the late 70s, I guess it was, I went to the Deerfield Hamfest, which back then was the Pack Rats, and I managed to pick up a Frieden typewriter. And it was a regular typewriter, but it also had this other feature. It had a little head on it, and it would punch or read 1-inch wide paper tape. So you could type up a report and make a copy of it on the 1-inch wide paper tape. And then if you needed another copy, you just run the tape through again, you got another original. And the theory was, I had been servicing CNC machines and so forth, and the Model 33 teletype was popular back then for terminals. I was going to take that and turn it into a terminal. Let me drop a second. One major gotcha, compatibility, which is coming back time and time again back then to get you. But this had a certain proprietary 7-bit Frieden code that it would punch the tape in. It wasn't a standard 8-bit ASCII, so there wasn't an easy way to convert it from the 7 to the 8 back then. So it was an interesting play toy for a while, and then it eventually went on to somebody else somewhere. So, but back then, compatibility was the big issue. Back to you.
All right, Jim. And then these are the really early technologies that some of them predated the computers themselves that we're talking about. The idea for the dot matrix printer came in the very, very early days of computing, but it wasn't really made practical until late 60s, early 70s. But Jim, so what you're talking about would actually punch a bunch of little holes in the strip of paper that would appear as letters, numbers, etc., right?
Yeah, think of the IBM punch cards that we're all used to seeing back years ago, where you had these little rectangles punched in the card. Well, this instead was 1-inch wide paper tape that you had a row of 7 possible locations. Technically, it was supposed to be 8. to run a CNC machine in standard ASCII code, but this, like I said, did the 7-bit frightened code. So, but you could type up a page of a report or something like that, and have a piece of tape probably about 20 feet long. And you go and put the tape back in the reader, and it would come back and make another original of what you typed. Mistakes and all.
Yep. So it's that same idea, the idea of punching out tiny holes in a matrix that made someone think, why can't we do that with ink? And that's where the dot matrix printers came from. There were 9-pin matrix and 25-pin matrix machines, so 3x3 or 5x5. And by maneuvering the paper and by maneuvering the print head and the paper, those dots could be interpolated into producing much higher resolution than they were capable of producing. Really interesting, actually, because some of those cheaper 9-pin printers could actually put out almost laser-like quality. It would take an hour to print one page, but it worked. So basically, then you have a print head, which was literally little tiny pins that would strike the ribbon and leave a mark on the paper. And there was even color dot matrix, which was interesting. And it worked. It just didn't work as well as what came later. So, but those were all of the physical impact versions of printing. Some of the early technologies remain today, and there's reasons. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Night. Dot matrix and daisy wheel in a different form, but daisy wheel still exists today. And the reason is multiple copies and high speed archival printing. So, and what that is, you can't produce carbons with inkjet or laser or modern technologies, or with thermal printing, which is pretty much just used for retail and portable or very compact printing. So in any situation where you need multi-copies with either carbon or carbonless multi-part forms, you still have to have some sort of impact printing. So dot matrix printers still exist for low-scale multi-part printing. What's daisy wheel technology used for? Well, what they call line printers. Now, line printers use multiple daisy wheel style heads. There are ones, I believe, that use multiple dot matrix heads, but what they are is they're super high speed impact printers. They are designed for high speed warehouse use or other situations where large amounts of paper reports or paper output have to be printed in a very small amount of time. They are large. They are so noisy that most companies that produce them will sell you a very large container that they go inside of, which is soundproof. And if you've ever seen one of these things work, it's almost like watching a waterfall of paper coming out of it. They're quite impressive, and they still exist. So those are all those early computer printing technologies, some which remain, and we can get on to the later stuff. But anyway, let's go around and see if anybody has any comments on the technology so far. First, back to Jim.
Yeah, K2PHM. The first dot matrix printer I ran into was an interesting scenario. It was a printer that would print on 2 1/4 inch wide roll of paper, and it happened to be located in a cash register at the Herman Sporting Goods store on Wolf Road in Colony. And they would print out your sales receipt with a dot matrix printer. And the technology back then wasn't quite perfected, so it was very noisy. And the particular sound it gave off made you think that the sales clerk had a big bowl of baked beans for lunch, and they eventually wound up retrofitting all the cash registers with a muffler. So, isn't technology wonderful?
Yeah, there is another style of impact printing. I don't know a whole lot about it, but you'll see it in the old cash registers and printing calculators, which is an impact printer using a wheel of numbers and symbols or multiple wheels that move across the paper. And that technology still exists because it's if you don't want to do thermal, which thermal printing has its negatives. That was the way the calculators did it. And I have some tiny printing calculators that still use that technology. So that's out there as well. All right, Paul, enter EYQ. What have you dealt with impact printing and early printer technology?
Let's see, all my printers, I just want to make sure I'm not squealing because I don't remember waiting for the beep. Oh, let's see, line printers printing off all them reports for the military personnel offices. Let's see, what did we have there? We had the daisy wheels, we had the whatchamacallit printers, the Selectrics. We had a mag card system that you typed it in there and you put it all on a mag card. We didn't have any paper tape stuff. Maybe that was old technology, but the mag card system used magnetic cards that looked like the old IBM punch cards. Imagine that. And it uses an IBM Electric printer to print the thing. And of course, we moved along over the years and the dot matrix and all this other stuff. And towards the end there, they had a lot of dot matrix printers to print off a lot of the information for your personnel records. And of course, color. I don't know. We really didn't do any color stuff. It was all the slow speed ASCII. Like I think the fastest thing we had was 9600 baud printers. So it wasn't very fast, but it was there. And of course, my own private stuff is I had an old 9-pin printer, and I did have a daisy wheel printer because I wanted to have something pretty neat, typewriter quality. But never find any more drivers for it. That was the problem, It was only good for a certain operating system. And going back to what you were saying in the beginning, trying to find drivers for these things. And of course, over the years, started going Inkjet. Inkjet is like, those things can be a pain in the butt if you ask me. They clog up, they get this, they get that. And everything I got now is all laser. That's where you like to.
That's all right. Yeah. I mean, there was certainly, as with anything, there were so many starts to the technology. There's always things that get abandoned. We see that in almost any industry that there'll be competing versions of everything. Some of that sounds really cool. Yeah, I know they had the Selectrics with computer interfaces. Not a particularly efficient or quiet way to print. All right, neat stuff though, and in its at the height of its popularity, dot matrix, the other technologies had already been developed. But laser printers were, frightfully expensive, but really cool. We'll get to those in a bit. Matt, KB2GGF, what are your early printing technology experiences?
Good evening, Neil, and everybody. The first computer printer I had was, I guess, about 1986 or 87, and it was a dot matrix 9-pin. Tractor fed paper, which was really cool. I love pulling off those tractor edges from the printed report. And used that same printer up until about 2002. when I finally got an inkjet, and everything I've had since then has been inkjet. I have not had a laser printer, so I don't have a lot of experience with those. But when Jim BHM was talking about the typewriter with the paper tape record, it immediately made me think of player piano rolls. Only it's not playing music, is it? It's telling me a story. But that's kind of cool. And I guess that's about it for now. So I'll send it back to Ned. KB2 GGF.
Thanks, Matt. And I thought of another early printing technology. Like I said, there's definitely stuff we're missing because there's always little, niche technologies that just didn't fly. Another one I can think of, and maybe Jerry knows something about this one, was the electrostatic printer. And what I remember was the first Radio Shack computer, the TRS-80 Model 1. That was one of the accessories you could get with it. It was an electrostatic printer that basically gave you a printout of what was on the screen, and the paper had a very silvery look to it. It was definitely a page printer, as opposed to a line printer type of technology. And when we say things like that, you'll hear those terms. A page printer takes information and prints it a page at a time. So it's dealing with a page of information, which is why memory was always an issue that had to be talked about with the early laser printers. Whereas a line printer is just taking a feed of either dots in a matrix or a feed of ASCII characters and printing them in a line and then going and starting another line. So, Jerry, WA2RKN, welcome to the discussion.
After this word from our sponsor. I was thinking about the teletype, but Jim mentioned that. Was strongly tempted to get one of those in the early days of the personal computer. Never did. One of my ham friends up here lived up in Kingston, had a NASR 33 that he was playing with on the ham bands. Don't mention yet of the Hellschreiber. That's an interesting technique. Is a lead screw and I guess a print bar or something that synchronized. You can get various designs, letters, whatever. I understand it was used by the Germans during the war. Let's see. I have an Oki Data SL 120 or 160. It's really kind of a weird printer. Dot matrix with a reciprocating carriage. It had like a fixed number of print positions, 22, if I remember correctly, and the whole thing would oscillate back and forth across the paper, and you have timing set up so it would know where it is on the width of the paper, and it would option the little hammers to fire at the correct time to print the position for the character, whatever position the carriage was in. And if you think about it, since this thing is oscillating back and forth, they had to apply a sine wave to the timing so it would know when to fire, because you're accelerating and then you're at a constant velocity and then you're slowing down, and it's a sine wave kind of deal. Page printers, line printers. Oh yes, I'm quite familiar with those. The 1403 Nancy 1 was the industry standard line printer for the computing industry. Well, at least in the IBM world, anyway. I understand it was pretty much a printer. Can't speak to other manufacturers. They were all over the place, and it was a line printer. The carriage was driven by hydraulics. Let me drop. That was interesting, and it had type slugs. You had a printed train with the character set, 3 characters on a slug, and it was going around and in a racetrack kind of formulation. You had a drive motor that would spin the thing up, and the type slugs would go flying across the width of the paper. And you had electronics that would synchronize the print buffer with the characters you wanted to be printed with the train buffer. So when the timing was correct and the character you wanted to print was synchronized with the train buffer representing the character on the train and position, it would fire the hammer. And it's very, very interesting printer. It printed 1,100 lines per minute. And then the follow-on to that was the 3800, which was a page printer, laser page printer. I never got into those. I made a deal with my manager not to get trained on that. Opted to get trained on a mass storage device. But Hellschreiber and that weird OP data oscillating printer is kind of weird. My first experience personally was the OP data Microline 92, the dot matrix printer. Annoying, loud, but it worked well. WA2RKN back to that.
Thanks, Jerry. Hellschreiber, yes. Really neat technology that is still used by hams today over the radio. It has a very interesting sound, almost like something is scratching at one of your screens of your house. And they have Hellschreiber contests and sprints, and you'll see it show up. And it has similarities to radio facsimile in how it appears when you use it and the type of encoding over radio, but it is definitely unique and interesting. And it's an old technology, like Jerry said. I did a little poking on line printer technology while you were telling us about the ones that you've seen. Tally is the industry standard impact, or not impact, but line printer manufacturer. But they also make high-speed commercial dot matrix printers as well. They make a whole line of impact printers. And their top-of-the-line line printer prints up to 2,000 lines per minute. Now, think about that. If you're printing an 8.5 by 11 page of text, that's an 80-line page, let's say. And that comes out to slightly over 2 pages, or 2 seconds per page. Slightly more than 2 seconds per page. That's pretty wild. And there are versions of it that print faster. And of course, when you're dealing with something like printing invoices or forms, you're skipping a lot of space. You're not printing 80 lines. So that's what I'm saying. To watch one of these things in action is quite impressive. And it's still something you can buy. This is technology that's still needed. I worked for companies that did warehousing, and their invoice printers and report printers were these things. And there were very specialized repair guys out there that I had to call when they broke. And we had very expensive service contracts with really, really tight timing on them, guarantees of service within a certain amount of hours. And even some of these guys that would come after hours, because you had to be up and running the next day if it broke late in the day. So really cool stuff, really necessary stuff. And I'll mention that my experience with the electrostatic printers was kind of neat. Was that after they printed, there was always that smell of ozone. And we all know that smell. It was just so weird to smell it, with that type of technology. But, I remember the TRS-80 computer would print out, this small piece of paper, which was pretty much just an image, a mirror, a copy of what was on the screen at the time that it was printed. And it had that smell like lightning had just struck. All right, Lou, you're up next. So what have you seen in this early printing technology?
Thank you, Neil.
evening, and to you and to all on the net tonight. Yeah, interesting topic. Throws me back a lot of years. See, my son will be 40 tomorrow. Born in '82, and I remember around that time, right after that, my wife started being a teacher's assistant in the city. So it was being a teacher's assistant and going to college at night, and so us swapping the duties between the two kids, and coming home from work and her headed off to college. So it was interesting. One of the things I used to do for her, because she never had the time to do between work and college, was actually typing for her. And let me just reset. Before we bought a computer, we had this crazy thing that I bought. It's PC Richards, I think it was, back then, to help me type, because I was getting tired of making mistakes on a regular typewriter. We didn't have even an electric one. We had an old manual typewriter. So I'd spend, while she was off at college, and then I'd get the kids ready to, whatever, take their baths and send them off to bed. And we just start typing in the middle of the night, so I could get up in the morning, the following morning, all that tired after the night of typing. Was this word processing machine. I can't even remember who used to make this thing, but it was probably 18, 20 inches wide and like a little suitcase. It was about the size of a typewriter case, I would imagine. And the keyboard flipped over and attached to the face of it. But it would actually, it had a black screen, yellow lettering, like the old computers you're all familiar with the green lighting. This one had yellow. And it would hold X amount of memory in there of the stuff that you would type in as a word processor. Then you could put in regular paper, and print them a sheet. I think it was a sheet at a time. I don't remember if you could put in more than one sheet at the time. But that actually printed very well, and saved me a lot of time with retyping stuff or making multiple mistakes. I wasn't the greatest of a typer, but I tried. Let me just reset. So seeing that she was going to be in college for a few more years, I made the investment, I guess, around the early 80s, probably in the 80s. When I just got into, I guess, if I remember correctly, the personal computers, I bought my first personal computer from a guy that I knew that could get his hands on them, I guess, for a price. I paid a fortune for that thing. That, I can't remember, it was a PS1, I think it was, or something like that. And I remember it cost me a fortune, and that was just regular DOS back in the days. I remember this thing had 10 megabytes of memory. That's all it had in there for a hard drive. That's how small those hard drives were. And the minimum, I don't remember what the regular RAM was on those crazy things. I don't think you could actually change them. But yeah, I remember that, and getting a dot matrix printer, Okie dot. I remember them so well, and it was noisy, but I remember like Matt said about the little track with the holes on the sides, and setting up your paper, make sure it didn't get jammed in the middle while you were typing something. While you were printing something, and then tearing off those edges. That was an adventure, but works well. It served the purpose. We had to do what we had to do with what we had at the time. And at work we had, when I worked for the airlines, both TWA back in the 70s all the way into the 90s, and then from the 90s until I retired from Continental United. And it seemed like everything other than the office, everything we had, like you said, in the parts warehouse was dot matrix, and anything else having to do with parts. And being an inspector there, so one of the things we had to do is when we got overhaul parts from the airplane back from the vendors, we had to just make sure all the paperwork was, legit and all of the thing was done and documented, and the proper vendors were the ones that were doing the work on the exchange units, and we had these. It was a thicker kind of cardboard paper, but it was and it had always had a copy at the end, and we always kept for local records. But it also had the little tractor drive edges on it, and we actually only tore off one end because we had to pull off the middle. It was two copies. Yeah, it was two copies to it, and the middle copy that we kept. But that was a really wide dot matrix print. I'm pretty sure it was an open dot, but I'm not 100% sure. But those things cost a fortune. I remember because one of the resident clowns there actually, I guess wasn't. They built a new warehouse actually at Newark, and when they built the new warehouse, they had a smaller warehouse that they used to keep parts at, and they moved everything towards the airport. And this guy, for being as careless as he was told to pick up the printer from the old warehouse and bring it to the new one. And he didn't tie it down and went flying off the back of the pickup truck. And boy, was our manager pissed. I don't remember. I could have sworn that somebody said, we're talking back around 2000, maybe. It was later than that. But 2010 maybe. But I think it was cost about 2000 if I remember, maybe more. I mean, we thought it was crazy for an old dot matrix, but I guess nobody made these things. And I remember the software was written for that, particular to use that particular printer. And they were such a pain because if they went off to the side, that it would never print on that particular standardized form in the right spots. You had to realign everything, and it was crazy, really crazy back then. And to the day I retired 2 years ago, I mean, we still had those same printers, and I didn't see where they were going to go anywhere. And I remember that one printer was, I don't know how they did it, but one printer you could actually have two forms. One was a narrow form that was for expendable parts, and the big wide form was for they called basically your parts that were stayed in house. So you had expendables and rotables, we called them, and because you'd rotate them in and out, and they were all serialized and kept track of, because that was all part of the thing. You have to making sure all your parts inventory and everything was legit. Let me just reset. So after that would work. I mean, after that matrix on the computers and my evolution of PC clones, IBM clones and all that stuff, I went through a lot of injects with Epson and stuff like that, and I hated those things because they were great while you were using them all the time. They would never clog, but the minute you left it maybe summer vacation, couple of months, I guess, and you didn't use it, those print heads would blog up, I guess, with ink, and they never work again. Back to the store, buy another printer. But we just reset. I remember my CPA would do my taxes all the time. He was always using laser, and I kept on looking at that. They were fortunate at the time, but as they got better, I think I've had my brother laser for at least 10 years. And that thing, other than putting toner in it, I don't do anything to it. It works perfectly every time. I don't have to worry about that I have to do anything to it. And it's, starting with network printers, that was a new thing, but that works so fine because I could be anywhere in the house on any laptop or anything. As long as I set it up, I can send it a command and it print it. So that's my history with printers and the old new ultra modern. I mean, the ultra modern. But dot matrix, yeah, those were something. I remember having them and forever always using them at work. That's all they ever had. But I guess they did the job, you know. And so I'll send it back to you, Neil. KD2TVS. Back to you, Neil.
All right, Lou, thanks. And yeah, we're gonna go into the next stage here, but there is a lot of interesting old technology, and just like someday we're going to look at our current computer technology and people will be like, we used to store things on these spinning platters called hard drives. And it's funny because obviously solid state drives, we still refer to them as hard drives, but that's the same reason why when we're talking about ASCII communications, there's still something called a carriage return. Think about it. What is a carriage return? There's no carriage on a computer. It's like dialing a touch-tone phone. There's no dial. A lot of these terms get stuck in our vocabulary, even though they're definitely outmoded and out of place. Yeah. Aaron, who checked in on YouTube, carriage return and line feed. Yep. Yep. Stuff that it has meaning in our modern computer terms, but it's definitely an outmoded term. It refers to a physical action that doesn't exist anymore, really. So interesting stuff. Before I see if anybody else is out there, let's throw it back up to Jim for comment.
Thanks, Neil. K2BHM here. Yeah, brought back lots of memories. I originally started with the Commodore VIC-20, and that was my first real serious computer. And then the Commodore 64, and everything was Commodore. You had to get the Commodore tape drive, and then a Commodore floppy disk drive, and I got the Commodore dot matrix printer and all that. And the programs were on game cartridges and so forth. And eventually I came across an IBM PC and started playing with that, and it was DOS. And the interesting thing back then was if you wanted a word processor program, you bought the word processor program for the IBM PC or the Compact or the Zenith. You had to buy the appropriate program for the computer that you were working with. And then once you got the program in and you called it up and wanted to set up the printer, you had to select the IBM ProWriter or the Epson FX RX series or the Canon such and such. And then this other program would have the IBM Pro Printer and the Epson FX RX series or the OKI. And no matter what program you went to, it would have the IBM Pro Printer and the Epson series, and then some other thing. So I wound up buying a Bell & Howell used off of a friend and found out that it don't work. It was not compatible with any of the above, and none of the programs would work with it. Let me drop a second. So I said, okay, let me go out and buy an Epson. Well, FX and RX were a little bit old in the tooth. They came out with the new LX series. So, okay, bought the new LX series. I happen to find the only printer from Epson that's not FX RX compatible. So it kind of worked, but it didn't work on a lot of programs because of it having a different instruction set. So it was fun back then. And the dot matrix printers, their usefulness extended long past when they should have dropped dead, because a lot of businesses had the tractor feed forms that were built-in carbon paper or that special transfer. So they would make 3 copies at once, and you had to do a dot matrix with that. You couldn't use a inkjet. So near the end, a dot matrix printer with tractor feed expensive because nobody else was making them, and industry still needed them, so you had to pay. Anyhow, back to you, Neil, K2BHM.
Thanks, Jim. And yeah, I remember our first printer at home was with one of the Commodores we had. We didn't have the VIC-20 for very long. The 64 came out not long after Dad bought the VIC-20, and he decided that he wanted to upgrade immediately. But yeah, those were serial printers. They were daisy chained with all the other peripherals, so you could have multiple disk drives. Which, when Paul and I were running the Commodore Club BBS, we had multiple 1541 disk drives, and that printer was in the mix. And they were weird dot matrix printers. There was something odd about them, and I can't remember what it was, but something that made them almost impossible to adapt for any other computer. I forget what it was. But my first PC printer, personal printer, was a Panasonic 9-pin. I think it was a KXP 1150, but I'm not sure. But I remember where I bought it, and I know I'll get a chuckle from Jim on this. CompuAd in Albany. No, I thought you'd remember that. They were a chain that went through some horrible financial failure and disappeared, but there was one on Wolf Road.
Okay, double with you.
Oh, sorry about that.
CompuAd? I don't remember that one. I remember CompUSA was up in Mason Farms.
Yeah, this predates CompUSA, although CompUSA existed, but they weren't up there yet. This is, oh boy, this would have been early to mid 90s, I guess. And when Albany got its first Hannaford over there on Wolf Road, they put that plaza in, and that's where CompuAd was. It was a smaller store, like the size of a Radio Shack, and they were not really like CompUSA in the fact that they didn't sell a whole bunch of different computer products, but they were more of a VAR. You would go there as a business to outfit your office with computers.
Okay, I got it. I remember closer to Central Ave, right where the entrance to the Northway is, there was Egghead Software. And you could go in and get software, and I don't remember if they had a lot of hardware there at that point or not. But and then down Central Ave a little bit was Geek Computers.
Yep.
The guy that was a salesman there used to work in the machine shop at SUNY, and I know him from there. So I used to get my computer stuff there and get not employee discount, but commercial discount.
All these places, they sold, lots and lots of dot matrix printers. I bought the 9-pin because they were some crazy price on it, and I really couldn't afford the 24-pin at the time. But it worked well with my Amiga when I got it. I bought it when I had my Amiga, and I had a desktop publishing package for the Amiga that really put out nice output on something like a 9-pin printer. Very slow, but it worked. All right, let's see if anybody else is out there that wants to join us tonight. Please come now with your call sign, your first name, and your location. This is the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. I am W2NDG, Neil from Highland. All right, Bob, we did hear you. If you want to chime in later, just when you get home or get your signal, just throw your call sign out. But I'll wait until you have a solid signal. But I did manage to make that out. Anybody else tonight? Aaron says he still has his first Commodore 64. Yeah, I don't. In some ways, I wish I did. In some ways, I'm glad I don't. I don't know. It definitely was a revolutionary computer, but it's like today, they're a little frustrating to use. My Commodore 128 had a much better keyboard. It was a lot more comfortable to use, but we didn't really use the 128s in 128 mode much. You pretty much booted it up as a 64 with a better keyboard. It's pretty much all that it was for us. All right. So we had Bob check in. Let me take a moment to bring us up to a newer level of technology here. Early 70s, they figured out how to get lasers to assist us in printing. And I can remember my brother Paul explaining the technology to me and telling me, how amazing it was and the different scales that it could print at. It could print minuscule text and extremely large text, and it was very versatile. And you could print in all sorts of different fonts, and it would also print graphics. Now, we were, of course, only talking about black and white back then, but it was still a neat idea. And how do they work? Well, and I'll speak my knowledge of the technology, and I'll throw it to Jim to see if I get any of it wrong. But let me drop. And that's my cue to say it's Neil, W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net with Jim K2BHM and all of our guests. So they figured out that they could modulate a laser beam across a straight line, and you're basically drawing the text, similar to the idea of printing graphics with an impact printer. You're printing dots and areas with no dot. So whatever the resolution was, 150 dots per inch, 300 dots per inch, whatever the early ones were. Today, of course, much higher. But it would draw in a straight line onto a drum, which was a heat-sensitive, rotating drum. And then it would draw another line on the drum and another line. And those lines of dots and no dots would create an image of text or symbols. And that drum then would rotate through usually a dry toner, very tiny particle dry ink. And as the hot drum went through the toner, or the toner was applied to it, it would stick to the drum and become molten in the areas of the drum where the heat remained. And then that drum then was rotated onto usually a transfer drum and then the paper, but there are different versions of this technology. It's not always the same. So basically you were drawing on the drum reversed, and then of course the printing would come out normal. Or if there was a transfer drum involved, you were drawing on the drum normally, and then a reverse image onto the transfer drum, and then that onto the paper. So it came out dry because of the heat involved. It usually, wasn't like ink. It would seem almost like the print you would see in a book when it came out. And it was, for somebody who had never seen this type of technology before, it was pretty miraculous to watch. Early laser printers were very expensive, and it wasn't something that a lot of places could afford. I remember when my family's business got their first laser printer. I remember my brother playing with it. I remember him, printing like a copy of our flyer on it. That was the size of a postage stamp, and you could actually read it with a magnifying glass, just because he could. But they were very expensive. And one of the things that I'll relate as to how expensive a good quality, high volume, high quality laser printer was colleges in the mid to late 80s. A friend of mine was going to RPI in Troy, and they basically had community printing. And with the mainframe that all these comp sci people were using, or anybody who was writing a paper, you could submit your paper to be printed, and it would have a print job, and you would be told that your print job was done via message. It wasn't really even called email back then. The system would tell you that your print job was done, and then there was a central like mail room in the college where you would go, and the print jobs were sorted by your student number or social security number into mailboxes, and then you would pull it, and it was in a little plastic baggie, all protected. And you were allowed to print a certain number of pages per month. If you went over that, you had to pay. Really interesting, but that's how it was. And today we don't even think twice about it. But it was such an expense back then. That's how they had to control it. But that's early laser technology. Let me drop. Of course, they applied that same technology to being able to print in color with multiple color toners combined to produce multiple RGB or CMYK color. So, but there was one other technology that made laser style printing inexpensive that came out. Aaron was commenting about the plotters. Yeah, I mentioned when I was talking about the other obscure early printing technologies, I was talking about plotters. And that's something that really existed for a very long time, because for large scale things like mechanical drawings and architect drawings, plotters were really the only way to go. Let me drop. LED printing is really what made laser style printing affordable for a lot of people. And instead of a laser, it used a very thin strip of extremely small, bright LEDs. And that's how it would get that heat and, image onto the drum. Now, these drums, it's not all about heat. Sometimes it's just that they're light sensitive. And that's how the LED printers worked. So you had a very thin strip of LEDs, and it would transfer, a straight line matrix of dots onto the drum that way. And then from there onto a transfer, toner, of course, involved, and then onto the paper. Basically the same ink technology that the laser uses, but with instead of using lasers, using a strip of LEDs. Much cheaper to produce, and not quite as much heat. But the problem is that the drums had to be replaced more often and were not cheap when you did. But the overall cost over time was definitely less. So that's laser printing. Jim, did I screw anything up there or miss anything?
Thanks, K2BHM. Yeah, I did have some experience with that. It kind of grew out of the Xerox copy machine. And one of my Deerfield Hamfest finds back years ago was it wasn't Xerox, it was a Savin copy machine from Standard Copy. And the way that one worked was you had a drum, like you say, and they would put a static charge on it. And the material on the drum was a photoresistive. So when a particular area of the drum was hit with light, that static charge would drain off. So as you took your piece of paper and scanned it across the slit with the drum underneath it rotated, where it was white, it would activate the coating and drain the charge off, and where it was black, it wouldn't. So then the next step would be to apply the toner to the drum. They had liquid toner back then, and eventually it went to a dry toner powder. And where the static charge remained, it would pick up the toner. And then it would transfer that toner to your paper. Let me drop a second. And then once it was applied to the paper would come out and go through a heated fuser roller, and then that would fix the toner to the paper and make it a permanent situation. And so eventually they came up with the idea that, if we don't have a piece of paper to copy, we could use a laser, or like you say, eventually LEDs, or LED laser, and activate that photoresistive layer and drop the charges where we need from an electric signal instead of response to a piece of printed paper. And that brought us into the laser printer age. And then it just went on from there. Back to you, K2BHM.
Thanks, Jim. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. I knew I left something out of that whole process, yes, and of course the fuser. So that's how the toner gets stuck to the paper. It runs through heat, and you get some interesting stuff happening when the fusers go bad in modern laser printers. But yes, that smell I was talking about before, very strong on those electrostatic printers. Yeah, the old Xerox machines. You know, you printed a whole stack of copies, and it just had that smell, like I said, like a lightning storm. So yeah, they were electrostatic, and I remember all that liquid toner. Oh God, in the early copiers we had in the business in Saugerties. So, but yeah, laser and then LED printing. Of course, they've managed to shrink this whole process down and make it smaller. I did mention memory because these printers absorb information from your computer a page at a time, not a line at a time. They did require a certain amount of buffer memory. And if you wanted to print things that were complex, you had to have memory, or else you'd get errors. The printer would tell you it was out of memory, and you'd get all kinds of crazy output, or you only get a partial page and an error. The first laser printer I owned was a Canon LBP 430. How do I remember that? But that was what it was, and I bought it at the Lechmere outlet in Albany. It was basically the same thing as a Hewlett-Packard LaserJet 4P. It was their basic home laser printer, but it was on some crazy closeout, open box, return, whatever it was, and it took the same toner as the HP. And God, I had that thing for years. And yeah, monochrome laser printers was all I had for a very long time. Didn't really, dabble with inkjet till later on. But that's the next thing that comes up is inkjet. 1976, Hewlett-Packard invented inkjet printing, a way of spraying ink through microscopic nozzles onto the paper and making sure that it dried. Early inkjet printers, you could tell that something was printed on an inkjet printer with the really early ones. It just had this look. It wasn't as sharp as a laser or LED printer or impact printers, but they had advantages. They were printing information a line at a time. Oh, I timed out. Where did I leave off, Jim? Are we back? Sorry about that.
Yeah, you lost about 10 seconds.
Yeah, I think my own timeout timer is almost matched to that, so I hear the beep here like a few seconds after it happens. But what I was saying was, since most inkjet printers, at least back then, were printing information a line at a time, like line printers, dot matrix printers, they didn't require all that extra memory, but they were able to print graphics, and the technology also lent itself better to color printing, which came soon after. There were different versions of inkjet printing early on. Canon's technology was different than HP's technology, which is different than Epson's technology, and IBM, which sold their printing division to Lexmark. But those were the main competing names in inkjet printing. And it was when they started figuring out how to get more and more resolution, better and better color, we started seeing the ability to print photos at home and really ramp up that technology. The print companies, at some point in that process, discovered that this was a real cash cow because they could control the price of the ink. And some of the printer companies even started putting a form of digital rights management, DRM, into their printers, where they refused any other way of getting ink into them, because, of course, the third-party ink companies all showed up, and refill kits and everything else. A lot of them will instantly void warranty if you have trouble with the printer and they detect someone else's ink in it. But I have my own thoughts on that. We probably won't go into that tonight. But yeah, inkjet, definitely not the most economical way to print, but it can be if you do your research and pick up ones that are designed a little more for high volume printing. Inkjet is terrible for low volume printing. If you don't print that often, it's gotten better, but it's still a problem. If you don't print that often, the nozzles clog, the ink dries up, and it becomes a waste. So that's why I stuck with laser for so long. But these days, I print quite a bit. I print for Jill's little business. We do a lot of printing, and I just had really good luck with the brother that's right behind my chair. For those of you on the video, I'll move out of the way for a second. But there's a brother laser printer behind me, which has been a really good workhorse. And actually, I was expecting to hate it, but I don't. So, laser, inkjet. There are a couple of more modern technologies that aren't that common, but you'll see them. A couple of them are wax thermal printing and dye sublimation printing. Some of these are used for printing commercially, ways of doing transfer printing onto things like coffee mugs and other objects like that. Wax thermal printing or solid ink printing allows you to do things like print white ink on something on a dark background, or metallic printing. So that's where some of the commercial printing that you see comes from. Decals, stickers, things like that. Not as common because they've been able to do some of that with the actual materials that you print on and transfer with. There's different ways of doing this now, but that's some of the modern printing methods. And I'm going to cover one more before we go around again. Let me drop. Sometime, I really don't remember when this was, but I'm thinking it was late 1990s, early 2000s, probably early 2000s. My brother had a friend who was working for us as a dental product salesman, but he was also from the racing technology industry, and he would run pit crews and racing engineering for people. He would fly all over the world, engineering cars and racing teams. And he told my brother about this new technology he had found that used inkjet style technology to print starch. And they would take this starch and this crazy inkjet printer, and they could print three-dimensional objects with it. And he started using this technology in the automotive industry, but he started using it to create 3D models for physicians of the images from some of their radiological images. So, printing an actual model of something that they had taken an image of. Obviously, we know where this is going. the dawn of 3D printing. But when someone told me they were printing starch, he drew the technology into the dental industry. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday night Science and Technology Net, and adapted that same technology to, instead of printing starch or plastic, of printing a modified porcelain product to actually create dental restorations on something which was basically a 3D printer. Combinations of something that would create a porcelain object and then run it through basically what we would call a CNC today, and mill it till it was exact. This technology exists now. They can create all sorts of things like that. But it was really interesting to hear the dawn of that technology, and it just reminded me, looking back on that, the same as looking back on the first time I read about compact disc technology as a kid, and what it meant and what it was going to do. Digital recordings on plastic discs. So anyway, that was the dawn of 3D printing. And of course, today, you can go out and buy a 3D printer and make things with it. Cool stuff. Where's it all going? I don't know. But I've got some ideas that if 10 years ago, compared to today, that 3D printing technology has gotten to a point where I have one downstairs. I could print housings for the kits that I build on it. What are we going to have 10 years from now? That's what I want to know. N3EYQ, Paul, I think we'll make this the final round. I still do get tired a little quick, but definitely a lot better than I was a couple of weeks ago. So what are your thoughts? Final round here, Paul.
I was trying to learn Jamaica while you were chatting away. Didn't get them. I don't know. You just faded into the noise and the QRM. Imagine that. That's 3EYQ.
Paul, our dedicated HF guy. Maybe the first one with the HF radio implant. So you can sit there and do FT8 while you're at work or while you're driving. Matt, KB2GGS. So this went pretty far.
It sure did. And boy, I had fun with my printer today. Yes. Well, I'll be back at it tomorrow. Eventually, I will get it to work wirelessly with the various Android devices and my Linux-based PC. I complain about it, but when it works, it's really pretty good. So, but I'm thinking laser. I might want to look at some laser printers if they're more reasonable now. I haven't shopped for a printer in a long time, so we'll see about that. But good topic, and enjoyed it. And send it back to net and say 73, everybody.
Thanks, Matt. And I'll warn you that when you do look at the low-end printers, like Amazon sells some off-brand stuff, for a laser, I would stick with, and I hate to say it, go with the low-end HP laser probably, or something similar. Brother still makes basic monochrome lasers that are inexpensive. Those two companies. I think Lexmark still has some low-end monochrome stuff too. But they're decent. We used to buy them for a while, and the reason why I'll warn you off of some of the alternative brands is some funky things can happen, especially if you're trying to use them in Linux or something. But my friend that I support remotely, who moved out to Vegas recently, he kind of went on Amazon, bought a printer, and I think it was a Samsung printer, which Samsung doesn't make bad printers, but it came basically set to operate in Europe. And he loaded it up with paper, and it has an intelligent paper tray, and it wouldn't print. It kept telling him that he was printing on the wrong size paper. It was because it came set for A4 paper. And when I explained that to him, he goes, "What the heck is that?" I've never heard of that before. But yeah, that's what the rest of the world prints. But yeah, he had nothing but trouble with the thing, especially with the Wi-Fi setup, which is what we've been talking about. So I have another comment on this. Let me just drop real quick. I found, I don't know what Canon still makes in printers, but for years they held a lot of legacy support in their stuff up through the 600 series, which were their really good inkjets, the 600, 610, 620. I think they ended with 640 or 650. As sophisticated as they got and as crazy as the software got, you could still dump a print job from DOS into the thing, and it would still support their old Canon modes. I could use something like Print Artist for DOS, which was similar to Broderbund's print shop. It was a piece of software for making like greeting cards and signs and things like that. I used to run the DOS version because it had great pre-made stuff in it, and it was quick. It was super fast, and it would still work with those printers. And I found that the basic monochrome HPs, Brothers, and I don't think Canon makes low-end laser printers anymore, but they would still support really basic printing modes, and that was a big plus. There was a period of time where HP started producing Win printers, and similar to the disaster of the Win modems. And they were printers that really were dumb. They relied entirely on the software that drove them from the computer. And God, what a disaster. So anyway, yeah. So that's my recommendation there. Jerry, WA2RKN, comments on all of this.
Wow, lots of coverage tonight. Yeah, personally, I have an HP something 2055 DN. It's a network attached printer. Don't want anything to do with the USB ports or the Wi-Fi stuff. Works just fine. Windows, Linux, you name it. I like it. It's aimed at the small office, home office kind of thing. Printers. You mentioned Amiga. That got me thinking. I have an HP 7550A. It's a graphics plotter. God, I love what you can find at flea markets and Hamfest. I think I picked this one up at Computer Fest in Jersey. Love that plotter. Uses pens, refillable, some are refillable, some disposable, felt tip or ballpoint. It's got a carousel. You can have 8 different colors or 8 different kinds of pens or whatever under program control. I drove the thing from the Amiga. I used Rex to drive the HPGL that the plotter understands. Printed out some schematics. Trying to think what else. Lots of fun playing around with the HPGL. You could do things kind of like a macro language. You could tell it to draw a circle by saying, XY, give the XY dimensions, and then radius, and it'll draw you a circle, and you can tell it to move XY or draw a square and all this kind of stuff. Very, very nice. Where do I go from here? I had some other stuff, but in one ear out the other, rattling around. WA2RKN back then. Oh yes, the restrictions on the toner and ink for the printers. Dymo is now lining up to do the DRM on the paper you put in their label printers. I classify all this kind of stuff as criminal capitalism. Don't like this crap. corporations are piling on using the MCA to further screw their customers. I don't know how this makes sense as a business.
See if I can hear what he. There we go. We missed about the last 20 seconds there, Jerry.
Yeah, search the net. Hackaday has covered these kind of topics a few times, and will guide you to get around some of this BS. So these kind of things are mostly restricting to people who are not technically competent. Nobody way too hard can back to that.
No, I agree 1,000%. We were talking about this earlier today. HP was talking about producing printers that basically had to be connected to the internet in order to print, and would automatically order the ink for you. And that was the only way they would work. Someone will always make something else. You just have to be aware and find it. Like you said, yeah, it's marketed just at the people who don't care. That's where it's going. Aaron added some of the best printers he had were label printers. He was talking about Datamax and Dymo. Yeah, I deal with them at work because in medical and even on the research side where I deal with, we're printing labels on all sorts of things. Mouse cages for that part of our research. Samples, all sorts of samples and tubes and trays, and but we're printing specialized labels, and some of those label printers are amazing. But like we were talking about, high-speed line printers for invoice printing and pick list printing and other warehouse things. That shipping and receiving department is printing shipping labels, and they're just spitting out of one of these printers like what Aaron is talking about. And they have to work. They have to work well. And the most sophisticated ones will just produce a label. It'll come out of a slot. It actually is removed from its backing, and it'll hang there. So you just tick it with your fingers, put it on the package. Really quick stuff, and has to be legible, and has to be durable. If it gets a little bit wet, you can't have something that the address is going to smear on. Stuff like that. He also mentioned portable inkjet printers, and that's for printing invoices for people out in the field. And that's something that still exists, is for people who have to print in the field. They do make these tiny inkjet printers. Not practical for home printing, but my brother has one, and it's you're talking about something the size of a roll of saran wrap or aluminum foil, lithium ion, wireless now these days, full color printers, and a lot of them have scanners built in, so you can read a document back into your laptop. Neat stuff, but technology that is out there for sure. Yeah, Jerry. Yeah, I mentioned plotters earlier. I had a friend who had one. Mechanical drawing blueprints, plans of buildings, drawing schematics. It was funny. It was in his workshop. Now, when I did it, let's say talking about plotters. Sorry, W2NDG for ID. I had a friend whose father had one, and down in his workshop, it was the only printing device he had in the workshop. So if he printed out like a list of something to give you, he would do it on the printer, on the plotter. What a neat device. Replaced, technology-wise, years later, by large format inkjet, really, really wide carriage inkjet printers. I even had one at one point. Cool stuff. Lou, KD2TBS, you're up next on our final round.
Thank you, Neil. KD2TBS here. Talking about those large format printers, I remember at work sometimes when the sheet metal guys had to do a major repair or something on the airplanes. Somebody decided to try to drive through one of these airplanes. I never saw the printer at work. I don't know who had it or what office it was in, but I remember they used to print out these big, humongous sheets of paper big diagrams of all the station numbers on the airplane with the formers and everything. Something really elaborate, nice printing. Compared to you having to do something on on your standard printers. And talking about the reliable lasers. Yeah, I have this Brother MFC 7360, like I said, probably 10 years, probably more. Thing is like a reliable workhorse. This thing, I mean, other than throwing toner in it, when it tells me it needs it, I don't do anything to it. It's great. And talking about those little label printers, I mean, I have a brother also, and I swear by these little printers, every little label I have to print up, stick on anything to identify something or whatever, it's great. And the only reason at work we used to label, sometimes I have to put the shelf life dates on some stuff just to keep track of, instead of trying to read all the labels, at least you knew, or looking back into information, you knew right away by looking at it. You could tell if something was coming up on a date or was expired. So let me just reset. And talking about 3D printing, I mean, I was really surprised with the before I left work, the 737 Max airplane. They came out with these. CFM is an engine manufacturer. I forget, Sigma or something like that. It's a French company, and GE. They made some kind of conglomerate together, and they built the majority of the engines that I think go on 737s from the inception of them all the way to today's generation of the Max. And an interesting thing, let me just reset quick. The CFM, or Charlie Fox Mike, it's called the LEAP engine. I guess it's all the newer technology, lighter, more fuel efficient, everything. LEAP, Lima, Echo, Alpha, Papa. If you ever guys want to do a search, a Google search on one of these things, they did a lot of 3D printing on that on the manufactured parts on that engine. The FAA signed off that they would be okay, and so far, from the guys at work, I haven't heard any issues with them in the last, I think, 2 years. I mean, granted they were sitting on the ground for about a year over that craziness with the foreign countries flying these things with, in my opinion, pilots that didn't have a sufficient amount of hours to be flying some of these things or improper training. But I forgot my train of thought where I was going there. But anyways, yeah, these they built a lot of these parts on this thing that were all authorized by the FAA to back. I think I saw an old letter from 2012 that they had authorized it. So I guess that was in the infancy of them designing this engine. And an example, they were giving an example of a fuel nozzle for your on the engine, like a regular nozzle on an automobile, but a lot bigger and a little bit more complex. Where it took they'd have to manufacture. There was a section of that fuel nozzle they'd have to manufacture 20 individual parts for, and the 3D printer actually makes all those 20 individual parts into one and does it well, and that's just a portion of it. But I mean, I remember looking at that engine when it first came into the engine shop at the airport, and seeing, because they ship them in all parts, and yet they have to put them together. At least the accessories, mount them on in the gearbox and that stuff. But I was remember looking at the turbine blades at the back end of the engine, and how funny they actually felt and looked from a 3D printing thing. I've never had seen one in person, but it always reminded me of those Damascus blades. I mean, mean, not as fancy a pattern, but Vasquez knife blades, they make also, I guess, gun barrels and stuff like that. An elaborate way of, I guess, metallurgy or whatever they do to do that. But that's what it looked like. It was like a strange little pattern to it. But supposedly they've held up, I guess. So they FAA signed off on it. So it must be good. Not in all cases, I guess. A lot of people probably have different opinions with Boeing and the FAA, but I mean, I was fascinated by it. That when you look at a jet engine, when making all these turbine blades and all the intricate, and you can have stages of compressor blades from probably an inch tall or inch square to, I mean, several inches long up front by the low pressure compressor.
And there we go. And we only lost about 10 seconds.
Okay, I got you. So yeah, it's fascinating that the amount of work that I would guess saved by doing the 3D printing compared to an actual machinist actually manufacturing all these multitude of blades and intricate small parts that go inside the engine. So back to you, Neil, KD2TVS.
Thanks, Lou. Yeah. And like I asked at the end of my last monologue there, where's it going? And it's going for us to be able to print in materials that we're not even considering at the moment, but, affordable, being able to print metallic things, durable things at home. But the scale is something I was talking about once before. What scale can we print at and how many different materials? They are talking about the technology to be able to 3D print an entire, let's say, circuit board with the components. So to, in one shot, print out the board material, the traces, and many or eventually all of the components themselves. So we're getting there. And as I mentioned, anytime this subject comes up, I know this because we had a guy speak where I work. I think we're going back 6 years now already, who was printing pharmaceuticals with 3D printer technology, printing at the molecular level. So, this is here, and it's going to get more and more interesting. So, anyway, yeah, Aaron just added 3D printers are now just amazing, but yeah, they're going to the technology is going to go and okay, yeah, good point, Aaron. Let me drop. I'm talking about scaling it down. He's talking about scaling it up. They're already doing this. They're printing houses. Really cool technology. So anyway, all right. Bob, K2LD, I don't know if you stuck with us. You're probably home by now, but you were the next one up if you're still there. All right. Well, knowing Bob, all that rain we got today probably fell as snow up where he lives. I'll catch him in the morning. Is there anybody who wants to check in at the last minute here? I'm going to throw it over to Jim for a tie-up, but is there anybody else who would like to join us before we have Jim close things up and retire for the evening? All right, Jim, I saved the best for last. Tell us what you think about all this. Where do you think it's going?
Well, I can tell you where it's been, K2BHM. Back in the 90s, I was field service for medical diagnostic imaging. And the nuclear medicine cameras. Color printers weren't really that good yet, but they had the dye sublimation printers. They were very much state of the art back then. You could get an excellent color image off of it. Seiko, I think, was the brand. So you had special paper that you used, and then you had a roll of film in there, and the film would have a full sheet of yellow, a full sheet of magenta, and a full sheet of cyan ink, and it would, I think it was a heat process, a thermal process, would transfer the dye from that sheet over to the paper and make the print that way. And back then it was about, I think, $4 or $5 a page to print that out. So it was medical. So they had the money to do that. You wouldn't use that at home. And then the first 3D printer I saw, let me drop a minute. About the same time, I went back to visit my buddies back where I used to work, the Arsenal, U.S. Army, and they had gotten a 3D printer to play with. It had a tank of liquid epoxy, and you had a platen, a table that was up near the surface. It had a very skim coat of epoxy on the top of it, and a laser would scan it. And where the laser hit the epoxy liquid, it would solidify it. And then once it made its pass, the table would index down a millimeter or so, and it would make another pass. And then index down another pass. And it would make a 3D object by solidifying the epoxy and dropping the table down into the soup until you got a full product, and pop the table back up and pull it off, and you got your part. So drop again. So as far as inkjet printers, I pretty much stick with the HP for two reasons. Number one, they seem to be the most Linux friendly. And number two, all the other ones have a print head and you have ink tanks. So if you don't do a lot of printing, the print head clogs up. And yeah, you got a tank full of ink, but you got a stuck print head, which if it's been sitting around long enough, you're not going to get cleaned out too easily. You wind up having a junk to printer or whatever. So the HPs, if it clogs up or whatever, the print head and the ink tank and all are one assembly. So you pop the thing out, and it's a little expensive. It's like $20, but you put a new cartridge in, and you got the new head and everything. So and me, I might print out a couple sheets a month or something like that. So if it screws up, you just try it a couple of times. If it don't clean up, put a little cartridge in. So, and they do monitor whether you're using official HP ink or not, and they squawk at you, but they still let you use it. I remember a time when Epson wouldn't let you print unless you had an official Epson cartridge in it. So that ticked me off. That was another reason I abandoned Epson. Let me drop again. Kind of reminds me of, for a while there, when you bought a Keurig coffee pot, it had a sensor on it, and it would not brew coffee if you didn't have an official Keurig K-cup in it. And I understand some of the car companies now, like BMW and Audi and so forth, you go and spend a couple $1,000 for ultrasonic blind spot monitor or lane departure warning or something like that. And you find out that it works for a year, and then after that, you have to pay a monthly fee to keep that feature working on the car that you spent all that money to buy in the first place. So that's that rubs me the wrong way. Anyhow, I think that's about all the comments on this end. I'll turn it back over to you. W2NDG, K2BHM.
Oh, Jim, it's funny. I know Matt was laughing or possibly screaming when you said the reason why you liked HP printers was their Linux compatibility. So I think the newest one, a lot of the newer ones, what's happening now is that they're making it more difficult to do the wireless part of the network printing in anything but Windows, because the setup for it is a Windows utility, and they're making it harder for the manual printing over wireless. Just getting an IP and going from there, and having the drivers print to that IP address. What some of these newer printers are doing, which is what he ran into, was that there's a utility which pretty much only runs in Windows, sometimes Mac, that wants you to connect the USB cable to the printer first so that it can do the configuring for you, because we're not smart enough to configure them ourselves. So that was where it's been. Yes, overall, I agree with you that a lot of HP stuff is more compatible with everything on a basic level. The problem is that things are becoming more and more software oriented again. It's like we're back in the nightmare age of the Win printer, which is something I mentioned earlier. It's almost like history repeating itself, and that was the issue that Matt came up with. So I don't know. We'll see where it goes. My take on HP, yes, if the printer is capable of printing with a basic driver, and this is what the whole Win printing disaster changed, then it's fine, because they'll fall back on whatever protocol that the older printers used and are compatible with Cups printing system in Linux, or Guten Print, if you have to go in that direction. There's different ways to get printers working in Linux and Mac OS. But if they're becoming more software based, then that's a problem. And that was always my complaint with HP, similar to my complaint with Lenovo's Windows computers, is that great piece of hardware, well engineered, well designed, but the software stinks. And if you can use it without having to use the software, you're fine. So I just worry that they're heading in that direction again, and I hope not. God, I hope not. Anyway, back to you for a second.
Yeah, well, I just got a HP printer a month ago for my sister-in-law. She retired and doesn't have the printer at work now, so she wants one at home. And I got her an HP Inkjet, and you have to have cups in Linux, Common Unix printing system, to interface to pretty much any printer. And then you go and configure cups to put the driver in for the printer that you want to use. And it used to be that you would go through cups to your printer on a USB cable and configure it that way. And more recently, you connect up the USB cable, and then you open up your browser and navigate to a website, which happens to exist inside the printer. And then from there, you can go in through Mozilla or Brave or whatever, and bring up the website for the printer and do your configuration there. And you don't have to do the Windows wizard. So I was able to set things up that way. And they do want you to connect it up to the internet and set up an account and all that kind of stuff. And they'll automatically keep track of your ink and send you cartridges when you're ready. Let me drop a second. And if you ignore that and don't do it, it still seems to work and squawks a little bit, but it gets over it. So anyhow, back to you, K2BHM.
All right. There's a number of devices today that work this way. Frequently, they'll do it with a mobile phone, where it'll tell you, you plug the device in, and it'll create its own local Wi-Fi network to start with. It'll tell you connect to eggtimer.local, whatever it is. And you connect to that on your phone, and then either the app you're running, or like you're saying, a web page will come up and connect to it and do the configuring, and then actually get it on your own Wi-Fi network. As long as it works, that's great. Yeah. I miss the simplicity of just getting the IP address, installing the driver, and letting it go that way. That's what I want, is that level of simplicity. So anyway, well, thanks for all that, Jim. And thank you, everybody else who checked in tonight. And I think we'll wrap things up unless anybody has any last-minute comments or check-ins. All right. Thank you, everybody. You have been listening to or watching the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club Sunday Night Science and Technology Net every Sunday night here at 8 p.m. We meet and discuss science and technology, not necessarily ham radio oriented. Please join us for the other nets that occur with the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club. Every morning at 8:35 a.m., we host the 8:35 on the 805, which is a casual roundtable net, not a directed net, hosted by a rotating cast of OMARC characters. A net that was started at the beginning of the pandemic for us to check in with each other, talk about what we're doing, what we need help with, just to make sure everybody is okay and staying social. Because we needed to be social, hams participate in the original social network. Every night at 6:30 is the 6:30 check-in net. Also started around the same time, a daily net, but held in a directed fashion, also by a rotating cast of OMARC characters. Come by at the end of the day and tell us what you did. If anything was fantastic about your day, or you need help with something that didn't go right, and you want to get some advice on it or get some assistance with it, we're here for you. Every Monday night at 8 p.m. is Undernet, the Ulster Northern Duchess Readiness Net, a net drawing hams together and teaching us how to react in the event of an emergency, what to have, what to do, how to use it. Ulster Northern Duchess Readiness Net, Monday nights at 8 p.m. Every Thursday at 8 p.m., Dave, K2JLV, hosts the Thursday night OMARC Tech Net. This is a more ham radio-oriented net, sometimes talking about computer and ham radio subjects. Dave takes check-ins and looks to see if anybody has a specific topic or problem they want to cover. They've done some pretty amazing troubleshooting. If a topic doesn't develop, Dave picks one for us. He's good at picking good topics, and that net can go 4 or 5 rounds or more into the night. Very entertaining and a lot of fun. That's Thursday nights at 8 p.m. An OMARC affiliated net, not on this repeater, is the Wednesday Hudson Valley HF net or 80 meter net. Every Wednesday now at 5 p.m. on 3835 kilohertz or close to it. In the 80 meter band, lower side band, Paul, AC2UQ, and some other people rotate net control for it, but they take check-ins. It's not just a Hudson Valley net at this point. They've been getting check-ins from all over the Northeast. It's our first HF net that we've hosted in this period of time anyway, and Paul's been doing a great job with that. So if you have an HF rig and you're licensed to operate on that frequency, check in with us 5 p.m. on Wednesday evenings. And if you'd like to learn more about the club, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to be a member to participate in any of these things that I've mentioned, but we do love to have you check us out, and we'd love to have you join us. You can check that out at omarcclub.org, omarcclub.org. Learn about us, and membership applications are right there on the website. This is Neil, W2NDG from Highland, New York, closing the Sunday night Science and Technology Net. We'll catch everybody next Sunday at 8 p.m. Everybody have a great evening. As usual, I'll hang out for 5 minutes or so if anybody wants to chat. 7-3. Ending the YouTube stream now.